Welcome to the Knock on Archery podcast, where we bring all archers and bow hunters together from all walks of life with the goal to educate, empower, and inspire you to be better both in the field and on the range. My man, Bill, what's up, dude?
Hey John, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I think, I'm not going to make the world tour of talking arrows if I don't have a few more people on, yourself included. So it was pretty cool to get a call from you, and I'm glad we could do a podcast. So this is awesome. Bill, I'm gonna let you say your own last name. I've always just called
Vanderheyden.
you Ironwill Bill. So
Yeah, it's easier to say that. Vanderheyden. Yeah, so
okay.
yeah.
So where are you from? Where's your family originally from?
Well, the name is Dutch, but from
You actually,
Wisconsin is where I grew up.
where at?
Montello. It's
Oh, you did? I didn't know that.
yeah, a little town, kind of by Wisconsin Dells area.
Yeah. Because I lived everywhere from Jefferson to Sparta. It was my whole Wisconsin era. So you were dead in between my two places.
Yeah, so you probably maybe passed through Portage to get there or something,
Oh,
but
dude. Yeah, I snuck up to Portage several times to ski Cascade Mountain all through high school, man.
oh
That
yeah,
would be
yeah,
our little, that'd be our ditching spot to get up
I
there.
did,
And
yeah, I did too. Actually, that's funny.
uh yeah, I think probably the only time I ever drank as a teenager in high school was up at the Cascade Motel. We rented that thing down there at the bottom of the hill, and it was pretty fun. So yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on, and I think it'd be cool to be able to talk, talk shop, talk arrows, really wherever this conversation goes. I want to just I guess be clear, tell everybody this whole kind of series that I've been on, Truth About Arrows. What I care about the most is just people being as accurate as possible, hopefully not going too far down these wormholes that I think most people aren't really going to see production on. They're going to I'm seeing it more and more now. I'm like following all these people that are tagging me, and I actually just a dude just did a whole bunch of tuning. He's been tuning for like a week, and he was like really happy with what he got, and I took his footage that he posted and I actually screen recorded it, and then I like imported it into my Dartfish program, and I was showing him his arrow instability. He was trying to go with a hard left helical, and that arrow was kind of like knuckleballing and then finally getting rotation, and he's trying to tune fixed blade broadheads, and I'm hoping people just realize, like, don't make it a good broadhead will help you not try to make this thing rocket science, literally.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Bill? Where's your headspace at? You've been seeing some of the stuff that I've been putting out, so I thought it'd be cool to, I want to hear all opinions and all sides, and obviously right now you're kind of dominating the fixed blade market, and just for the record, I found this. I believe this is one of your first.
It is, yeah. That was our original V series. I might have gave you that one. I'm not sure, but yeah,
Yep.
that was the first one. That was the
And
first
then
product.
well, I'm sure you're like me. People say, "Yeah, I ordered something. Did you see it?" And I do not see orders.
Right.
Um, but I actually ordered these, which is much more of a design that I would personally prefer, just based on historical tuning. But yeah, I got three of these guys right here. Um, so
That's
these
our
are
single bevel 100 grain,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Leaders.
I'll shoot a few things with that this year, and I haven't tuned it yet, but I don't see why that's gonna have a problem. That thing looks pretty nice.
It's
Are your bleeders removable for people? Do they have that option?
you can remove them. It drops about 10 grains. We also sell 125 grain on up without bleeders. We call those our buff versions.
Okay. And
Yeah.
have you tested sound on the non-bleeder?
We've tested sound of the bleeder version versus field points in the recent university testing, and there wasn't a statistically significant difference actually between our field points and broadheads. So we haven't looked at if we pulled the bleeders out, would it be quieter? Because I don't think we'd be able to, measure a difference there.
Right.
It's differences down kind of in the noise, I guess, within the experiment.
So what in that are you using one of the sound chambers?
We are No, we don't have a sound chamber, because we're trying to shoot, 40 plus yards and record it.
Okay.
We're doing it indoors, and the last time we did it was in a field house where there was no, we just try to kind of minimize the sound. So there's always a little background noise, which can limit, to what degree we can tell the difference in sounds. But if we're not seeing a difference, a statistically significant difference, it's a pretty small difference there.
Have you ever seen like one of these right here?
Is that a little wind tunnel?
No, that's actually a sound chamber. So that has microphones at four different places to be able to test audible sound. It's actually a chamber that I've used to test fletching sound. But also you can use it on broadheads too. I mean, it's kind of, a totally, sound contained tube, right? So it can measure the sound at the bow, but then measure different sounds throughout pretty much throughout flight and then impact too, which is pretty cool. So
So how big is that? It looked small to me in the photo.
yeah, it's only going to be about a 20-yard shot for measuring the sound, but based on the containment of that thing, that's really all you need to be able to measure the audio, from launch literally coming out of a thing into a new chamber, which would then just measure that sound and then, it measures the sound in 2 points and then you'll have sound on target.
Gotcha. Well, we're going to be repeating a test and adding a few more things to look at this year at the university. So maybe I'll get some more information from you on that.
So so are you pretty much funding a research project then for a certain class, or what is the basis to it?
Yeah, so I've been a adjunct instructor of mechanical engineering at University of Colorado, mechanical engineering department. Been one of the faculty directors for the senior design project class. So it's seniors in mechanical engineering. They spend a year long design, kind of researching, designing, analyzing, prototyping, testing. So I've been involved with that for several years. This last year, I sponsored a project, so I'll be the company is paying the cost of the project. But it's kind of unique that since I'm on the faculty, I can also be the director of the project, and then they don't have to hire another faculty director, so it reduces my cost, and I can
Yeah.
also kind of direct, give them more direction in, how to do different things, how they should analyze data. My input is more like, what are the best engineering methods for design, modeling, computer analysis, prototyping, testing, design of experiments. So you can tell if there's so you can quantify differences between things or performance improvements, things like that. So last year, a lot of time was spent on first studying several different veins in the industry, or kind of some of the top hunting veins or most popular hunting veins out there. And they CAD models of those. So we have CAD models of the arrow with all these different veins, attached to different angles. We used a 3-degree helical for a lot of it, but we looked at some other angles there too. And there's Ironwill broadheads in the front. So what we wanted to do was some testing. So there's a fair number of articles out there, like James Park's articles on arrows with field points on it, and the aerodynamics there, but it's pretty minimal information out there on arrow flight with fixed blade broadhead on the front.
Right.
So that's really and I'm a big advocate of fixed blade broadheads, and we can both agree and go back and forth on, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and I totally agree. There's advantages and disadvantages of fixed blades over mechanical, so there's trade-offs there. But if you're going to shoot fixed blades, I wanted to get some scientific data really on how can you make this fly well.
Right.
And some people struggle there. You need, in my experience, if you've got the right vein, enough vein on the back, at some angle to get some rotation, if you're properly spined and a relatively well-tuned bow, they can fly well for you, at distance. It'll depend on the size of the blades and things like that too. But I wanted to kind of this independent study that showed that or could quantify that. So, anyways, a computer model, which is CAD models, and then fluid dynamic model. And in this model, we can look at airflow on an arrow, flying straight or rotating. And it can be tipped at an angle as if it's coming out, say, tail left out of your bow, 5 degrees. How much restoring torque do we get from each of these different vane configurations? And how quickly does that pull it back on track and to go down range? And, things we looked at were accuracy, stability, drag, wind drift, spin up, and sound. So we can model those things, but then we also did this empirical testing out of a shooting machine, a hooter shooter. We used a high-speed video where we could look at, the spin up and arrow stabilizing coming out of a bow, and also maximum spin rate later near the target. We used a lab radar to get, velocity of the arrow as it left the bow and then downrange. So we could then calculate a drag coefficient and compare that to the model. And we used a sound recording system. So there we just had, we had microphones downrange that we shot over. We collected the data, ran through a MATLAB program so we could look at the frequency content of that data. And we tried to look at it for, kind of peak human hearing, 2 to 4 kilohertz. And then what we be more a deer's hearing range or more effective to a deer, I think which I believe was 4 to 8 kilohertz. So we could kind of say, does it sound a little louder to a human or not, and to a deer or not? And we also looked at, when did that sound happen? What was the sound of the bow? How loud was that? How long did that ringing keep going? And then what was the sound at, 10 yards from the animal, and then that last 0 to 5 yards from the animal.
So, can I play devil's advocate just
You
because I'm
bet.
curious? So are is everything just is being modeled, or is it actually being I mean, is it actually being modeled based off the input from the footage from the high speed, or is the modeling just done from like more or less like a CAD type program? For those who are listening, I want to go technical because obviously there's going to be some people that are highly technical listening, which I think would be good, but there's also going to be some people that are going to say, well, what does this mean for us? So,
Yeah.
um, when you say that modeling, can you tell me exactly what that is or what you're using for that?
Yeah, definitely. As we go through this whole thing or our conversation today, if you see anything like you think could be improved or is wrong, hey, I'm just trying to learn. I know
Yeah,
I'm a teacher, but I'm also a student in the game here. I want to
me
get
too.
better at everything, and so feel free to point out, and I want to touch on a few things where our opinions have varied a bit and get your thinking and my thinking because
Yeah, I
I
would
just want
love
to get
that.
better at this.
Yeah, I think
Completely.
as an industry, I honestly think that these types of conversations are overall more productive. I think throughout this series, I've said my piece to begin with. I brought on someone who I think can like get people's antennas up, which I think, which is cool. You've actually read some of James Park's material, which I think is a very good testimony for me. I wanted James first. And like kind of like I told you yesterday, the thing is like when you get like super ridiculously smart people, um, like I don't know how many podcasts James does, but I don't think it's a ton. And
Right.
I had to lead him through that podcast. It's like we had a delay. So if I'm not seeing him respond on his own, I had to keep talking. And I knew the information that I wanted out there from his perspective, and I wanted to spur some thought, which I think our industry right now, I've got everybody's attention. Um, but I think these conversations are what the industry has to have. Like these are the types of things we need to start doing because all I want is for people to be better. That's all I want. I want people to be better. I want them to have I don't want them to know, like, to think they know so much that they go in and they argue with someone like a Wayne Endicott, that's literally seen probably more than me, especially now, because that's one of the things I told Wayne. It would be valuable for me to go to the bow rack or, any of these shops and hang out for multiple days to just get current on what some of these techs are encountering because, I've kind of found through my testing what I think simplifies things. And, my methodology on coaching, my methodology on shot execution, my reasoning for arrow choice, my reasoning for arrow configuration, and honestly, my opinion on release design, those are all just based off what got me to where I'm at the easiest without having to spend tons of time. And I really don't like the amount of people that go so much further than me on what they're doing. But then when I see just the results, I want to try to simplify that for people. And I think it's great that you're doing a study. I think it's, whoever else. I've talked with Troy. I'm gonna talk with Troy, just because, I think some of the things he's done were important for him at the time, but I also think it's revealed other things to where his ears might be open to some different things now. So I think all these conversations are productive because the worst thing for our industry is divide. We can certainly have opinions on, like I told you, there's times I love an expandable and I have things about expandables I really like, but I also, I can tell you right now if I had to make a quick follow-up shot, which, some of these hunters that say, "Well, I'm only shooting 25 or 30 yards." Well, if you've hunted enough, you're gonna hit an animal poorly. If you've hunted enough, hopefully you don't lose one, but honestly, if you hunt enough, that's gonna be reality too. And in that case, if I had to make a follow-up shot that was a very long distance, well, now I need more penetration. And guess what? That's why I've that's why I've bought these, because there's going to be a time where if I have to send this thing, full send, this is going to penetrate better. I know that in the close quarter range, where I'm not really too concerned about penetration. I have my preferences as well, but I think there's certain applications I know for a fact my wife or my son would do great with that head, and that head's a way better option for them. They're shooting an arrow that's way lighter. They're shooting half the poundage, and they've got 5 inches less draw than me. So like those are awesome options. So I just want to make sure everyone listening knows I'm very interested in what Bill's going to say. Hopefully, Bill just said he's interested too. So that's how I want us all to be. We should all have an open mind. We should listen to each other. So I'm going to ask Bill some questions, and I'm not asking him because I'm trying to debunk anything. I'm asking him because I honestly don't know. And there's some things just based on my experience where I'd like to know. So that's why I asked you the question about that. The other thing, are these guys, are they mechanical engineers or are they, do they specialize in aerodynamics?
Yeah, they're mechanical engineers, and they'll graduate kind of at the end of the year. And they've all had aerodynamics to some amount. It's part of the curriculum, kind of like I did, fluid dynamic modeling. Back when I had it, my professor was one of the first inventors of the ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile at NASA.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
Yeah, and so there's great stories with him. So I think it's required in all mechanical engineers, and then some people can have more of an emphasis in it, and some of these guys might, depending on their electives, but usually the guys that are we had 30 teams wanting this project last year, and usually the people that work on it, are want to be in the fluid dynamic modeling or have more of that emphasis, but
So when
yeah,
you're
and
testing some of this stuff, I mean, how much of it is actually what you're capturing in air versus what you're predicting based
yeah,
on the
so
modeling?
yeah, good question. So let me answer that. When I'm saying analytical and modeling, I'm really well, we do some capturing of data, like the drag, the velocity data, and then we have a model that then calculates drag coefficient to
Right.
compare forces. So we will take some like empirical data, have a little model there to compare drag force. Um, so that can be another model. But when I'm talking about these analytical models, it's really all computer stuff. It's we design it in CAD in a 3D model, the full arrow with the broadhead in the front, knock and everything. It looks just like an arrow, rotate on the screen. Apply velocity to it, airflow to it. So it's fluid dynamic modeling, but so I sometimes get this: why are you using fluid dynamic modeling? It's not water. Well, oh, air's a fluid too. So it is fluid dynamic modeling we use for the airflow over it. And we can get sound, drag force, all these things from the model. But then we're trying to test them empirically. We're trying to actually shoot each of these configurations. So they flexed up. We looked at blazers, tacs, max stealth, max hunters, hybrid hunters, silent night, SK2, super sabers. Might be forgetting one, but they actually used a Bitzenberger and flexed these all up at the same angle on arrows, and then shot them, and then took looked at high speed camera for spin up, and used the lab radar to get velocity, drop over distance, things like that.
Right. So like, I assume you have one sec here. So I assume you're probably like using one of these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep. So your drag coefficients are really just based off, launch out, and then that's obviously clocking it. Do you guys shoot 100? What were you shooting for distance?
Yeah. So the drag coefficients, we first model them in the computer and see
Uh-huh.
what the model says they should be, and
Yeah.
then we shoot to try and verify the model. And they're not always perfect.
I was gonna
Models,
say,
right?
I was
Yeah.
curious. And so here's the thing. I really want to be clear. I am trying to learn from you, Bill. So I'm gonna play like if I worked through all my testing I've ever done, I think the
Mhm.
reason why I've learned what I've learned is I'm devil's advocate a lot. Okay. Um,
And let
so
me
how,
interrupt you there. So
yeah.
I'm used to working with engineers. I designed products in companies for 25 years before I started the Broadhead company, and that's what we do as engineers to each other.
Okay.
We don't believe anything you say unless you got data to back it up, and we question things. So, hey, I'm totally used to that. I'm not at all offended by that. If somebody questions my experiment or my data, that's just how we do. That's just how we do things as engineers. I'll
I
say
love
this
it.
I'll say this design is better than this one. No way, like, where's the data? I
Yeah.
can't say, well, I have a gut feeling that it's better. You're just going to get torn apart. And we're friends, but it's like, you back that up, to explain to me how you did that. So I'm totally used to that. So, fire away with
Good. I
whatever you
love
got
it.
there.
I love it because like I said, in the end, I hope all of us can learn from some conversation. So, um, a friend of mine who's been on the podcast several times, Dr. Stephen Leith, he's been on, he's been a bow hunter longer than me, great guy, works in the industry, currently serving as president of the Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports. His brother works for Boeing. Worked for Boeing. He's worked for Boeing for a long time, and he is an aerodynamic guru. When Steve showed him some of this stuff, and some of the stuff that I talked about with James Park, he actually took it to him too, because Steve's an EDU person. He's a doctor himself, and more importantly, he's actually a botanist by trade, so he's used to scientific data, and he's run that and been president of ISU and Auburn. So I value him questioning, data too. And so he
Mhm.
took that to his brother, and he told me, interestingly enough, that his brother just said, listen, even though he works for Boeing, he's like, my opinion and what I can tell you about an arrow is so very, very different than what we're dealing with. So, I
Yeah.
think when people listen, I feel like that's a very, very valid thing that people should factor in on some of this stuff and on some of the opinions that we're seeing. And I'm saying this, Bill, because you do a really good job of going to events, and you also shoot, and you shoot well, and you've got good technique. And to me, those things are like important. Those are very important when I'm trying to decide whether I value that opinion or how far I'm going to value that opinion. So it's awesome that you can shoot, and it's awesome that you're doing that. And for me to hear this person that works for Boeing, who's literally, an aerodynamic, whatever they are, um,
Yeah.
he's just like, listen, the forces on that arrow and the flow on that arrow, because the arrow isn't, one, this wall is varying. There's a lot more flex happening here than what's happening, on an airplane. There's obviously it's a much shorter span. Um, Not to mention the way these things are launched. When these guys are dealing with planes and rockets, they're not usually shot with a rubber
Mhm.
band. They're
Right.
they've got a thrust that isn't a propelled string that's putting a pretty substantial dynamic force on the arrow. So I think for any of you out there who, you know, are listening to someone, because there are some people that have some, I guess they've got some clout when it comes to like aerodynamics. But I also start to question, like, well, how much has been really, really specific to an arrow, and how much can you actually do yourself? I think that's important for like you to ask people. I think it's important for me to ask people, especially when we're getting people's opinions on this, because yesterday we talked and we were kind of figuring out what time we could have this podcast, and we both started kind of talking about the shooting machines. And now that you've been playing around with those things, it's like I think I think your opinion might be a little different on a shooting machine now than when you very first thought, I'm just going to go out in this shooting machine. So tell me what your takeaway is on some of this stuff, and what is important for us to take away, and the other part of like, do we really need that all the time?
Yeah. So there's a few things there, but I want to touch on them. The yeah, an arrow in flight, whether it has a broadhead on it or not, it's pretty complex. It's a pretty unique situation. There's not a lot of research and data out there anyway, and it's hard to just apply something that might be true on a bullet or a rocket, or something. Rocket's closer when the thruster goes off, but it's kind of its own animal there. So it's hard to just apply things out there or general rules or whatever. And in the modeling that we're doing, I'm always skeptical of models. And are they accurately modeling what's happening? And that's really the reason why I don't ever just model something. I'll do the empirical testing and see, does this testing agree with the model? Because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And I think you think the same thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, let me just shoot groups with these two different design points
Yeah.
at distance and see how they hit. Because I do the same thing. The students are using a shooting machine because none of those guys are archers, and they're trying to take human error out of it. But yeah, I found that shooting machine, when I first got it, set it up. I quickly realized, I
It's
was
a
talking
pain in the ass.
to John Stallone. He'd been using one quite a bit, and then I added a laser for the sight, so I can at least point the bow at the exact point each time with laser. Even so,
Yeah.
without a lot of work, I quickly found out that I was better shooting offhand at distance, and just if I knew my pin wasn't where I wanted it to be when the shot broke, I just throw that one out.
Right.
And I think you probably do something similar where you just feel, and you're a better shot than me, where you feel like, offhand, you can really, with enough shots, you can really see if this design point's better or than this other one. So I
Well,
recognize
because you
that
know
way.
what I think's critical, Bill, is so many people are trying to test this thing. Like, honestly, even the bear shaft testing, if you go too far with it, it's like that's really not what you're shooting. I think the bear shaft thing really helps you understand getting your spine to match your bow. But, once you start playing with different point weights or different front inserts, a lot of that stuff can just rapidly, rapidly change. So I feel like the human error part of this equation is very, very important for it because even when I'm doing a method that I call the hill method, which is, I just shoot groups and I can, throughout all my data, I can tell by horizontal variance how that shaft is responding to the bow. I can just instantly see it. Shows up downrange. I don't have to waste time through a piece of paper. It's showing up. It's like telling me I'm weak, I'm stiff. It's just showing me that. But I need to know when I make a marginal shot, like if I make an 80% shot or a 70% shot, which is highly likely in a hunting situation, I kind of want to know where that's going to go because honestly, at that point, your gear choice, your technique, and your setup, the match of your bow and your arrow, those things all start to factor in when we talk about that technique or even having the type of release you use in the hand position that you shoot it in because certain hand positions, I talk about rocker position and I talk about angle of pursuit. Those are two things that totally immediately will affect the direction of the arrow. And then you've got the same thing in front hand, you know, pressure here, even pressure here. Obviously, you got left and right. So I personally like having some human error because if I say that wasn't a great shot, but it's probably one I would have to accept in a hunting scenario. And if you go down there and that's still in the kill zone, but it's not like way the heck off, like then I'm actually checking for a setup that offers me some forgivability. And I feel like if all you're ever going to do is shooting machine, or, you know, bear shaft, and that's it, well, you start to not really understand what happens when you're not 100%. And the truthfully is like, as much as I train all year long trying to be 100%, I'm not. And so I kind of want to know when I make a shitty shot, how shitty is it going to be?
Yeah, and I shoot year round, and I agree. That's the ultimate test, right? I just got a dozen arrows in a couple of days ago. We do a custom arrow build now where we kind of machine and square very accurately both ends and build them up. And this is a repeat build for me of the ones I've been using all summer. But I got a dozen in. I'm leaving for a caribou hunt tomorrow, actually. So um, I put a field point on. I shot them all at 100 yards, and then I put a broadhead on, and I made a 10-inch square out at 100 yards, and I shot them all. And that was my test on, is this arrow going in my quiver or not for this caribou hunt?
Right.
And am I going to hit, a 10-inch? I'm sure some
Kill
guys can shoot
zone.
better than that, but I'm happy. I'm happy with that. And I put all 12 in that 10-inch square, and that's kind of the ultimate test. How did it really shoot? I did it with the S125 and single bevel 125 because haven't decided which one I'm going to use yet. But that's kind of the ultimate test. How does your with the broadhead you want to use, with the arrow setup, the vanes you want to use, your bow tune that you have. Shoot groups at what you think with broadheads. You maybe just shoot one at a time or something so you don't wreck them. But
Yeah.
how well can you really group? Because that's not covered under warranty anymore.
Yeah.
So how well does it really group for you at that distance? So that's really where the rubber hits the road. That's what's important when it's all said and done. But the reason for modeling really is that it's hard to just see like this vane feature had better groups than this vane feature. I mean, we can see that, but then why? Why did it? So if in the model we can look at, well, how does the airflow across it? What's the pressure difference on the edge or the two sides? What's the turbulence off the back? We can look at the differences that are happening in the model and say, oh, I think I understand. Like this airflow is more gradual, and like for sound. There's some interesting things we're learning on sound, but we might see, oh yeah, I see how the airflow goes and why there's less turbulence, and okay, we can get sound cheaper, or not cheaper, get sound reduced
Yeah.
if we add this feature. So that's really the reason for the modeling and pushing it back to the computer model and the CAD models, is that when we see that there is a difference, now we can understand why that is, and then in the model, maybe we vary it to 10 different angles and then see what the model shows is best, but then empirically test it and see if there really was an improvement or not. So it's trying to push it back onto the physics and having a more fundamental understanding of why something's better or worse.
See, I haven't seen any of that type of modeling recently, and obviously, like if it's anything to do with electronics, I know that it would change drastically. I mean, I've done some, and like honestly, some of Jim's testing and stuff that I saw at the time was more in an actual wind, in an actual wind chamber. Um, but then there was also some stuff that was done with like where there's actually like a robotic hand that was mounted to a shooter machine, to where the robotic hand you could adjust the pressure of the hand and then see what the results were, which honestly is ultimately why I tell people to grip the bow the way I tell them to do it, is kind of just based on like the average of repeatability. The more you just kind of try to do it a certain way, you realize with those types of things, you can realize pretty quick some things aren't necessarily repeatable for everybody if it's not natural. And some of my just basic coaching fundamentals are things that the majority of people can do and repeat, if it doesn't totally feel natural, which for a lot of beginners, archery doesn't feel natural at all. So were you able to actually see, like, for your single bevels versus the other, or the right or the left, were you able to like see how much your broadhead actually would affect that rotation with the same type of vane configuration?
In flight, if a single bevel changed the
Yeah,
rotation.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good question. That's on the list of things to look at. But no, I don't have that. I don't have that data yet,
Dude,
and I'm pretty curious about that because of some things I was seeing.
I've like, if everyone just waits a year, I,
Right?
I've got
Um,
that. I've got that. So yeah,
um,
you'll love that. And I'm actually curious on that too. But yeah, because some of the technology that I'm part of, I can't talk about right now. So that's one of the things that's on my list too. So I was curious if the model showed it, because the one thing that's going to be really cool down the road is I'll be able to show exact versus a model. But the thing is, this exact will feed into an AI tool that AI tool will then probably rewrite the models. This would be my guess, right?
yeah, that'll be great. One thing we're doing to really, so in the computer model, we're tipping at arrow at 5 degrees and looking at the sum of the forces and how much torque there is. You know, um, stability is kind of a measure of where the center of pressure is behind the center of mass, and
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
but we can calculate the torque from the different ones. And then with the hooter shooter, we put it a little out of tune, so the arrow's coming out, say tail left, and we'll quantify it
Are
at
you
40
doing that by moving the rest, Bill? Or are you actually trying to torque the grip on the hooter shooter?
We've done some of both.
Okay.
Do you have any experience there or any recommendations on what you do there?
Of course I've done it, but I'm curious how you're I'm curious if you're just trying to get that tail whip. So when you did that, are you doing that through your program too, or are you able to like overlay your high speed with that? Because does the newer 3D modeling, like, is that able to actually process the paradox as well? Because obviously if you're, if you're coming out left, right? But then this is also happening. Well, now these blades are,
Mhm.
but and there's a reason I'm asking you that question. So I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. So we've done both there.
Okay.
The the model doesn't have the paradox going on in it, and really with fixed blade heads, I like very little paradox, very little bending, and
Yeah.
so I like to be optimally stiff to a little more stiff, and I see the high speed video, I see maybe like a half inch of vertical flex, and then the
Yeah.
arrow's pretty much going straight.
Yep.
That's what I want. Guys that put too much weight up front, extreme FOC guys. You look at videos
Easy,
on
dude. You
YouTube,
might
and
be
the
hunting with
arrow's
that
bending
like
up and
a
down like
day.
crazy the whole way there. So I don't want that. But knowing our model, we're just modeling it as a straight arrow.
Okay.
Models tend to, the more complicated you make a model, sometimes the more, the less I believe it too.
Oh,
So
okay.
I don't add complexity where I don't think it matters too much. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but if it flexes and it's going straight pretty quickly, I'm just going to model it straight and see what the model shows there.
Well, here's
But
why I'm asking you that, Bill. The reason I'm
yeah,
asking you that is because there's gonna be people that are that are chasing extreme FOC, and honestly, this goes right back to what started me down this rant, if you want to call it that. I personally feel like it's truth. I feel like it gave me a reason to talk about things that I've been fascinated with for a long time, and honestly, things that I've dedicated a lot of my life to. But what I can tell you is, let's say your model tells you with your broadhead and it's coming out, that with your fletchings, you're able to get that thing stabilized and life's
mhm,
good again, right? See, I think part of what's happening is, you've people essentially have this huge ass rock with this wet noodle behind it. And yeah, the rock is tracking, but that wet noodle, is kind of flopping around too. So like I think if someone's shooting too much point weight up front, which, let's face it, like for me, I would struggle to find a stiff enough spine arrow to shoot some of the
mhm.
point weight that I've heard and physically seen people shooting, because it's almost like, you know, it's like a guy wants, I had a gladiator, but I wanted to supercharge it, And it's like once I
Yeah,
supercharged it, I was trying to see what else I program it to get a little more, I just, redid the chip on my diesel. Same thing, right? So some people chase that. They're like, "Oh, you've got 250 in the front, I'm going 300." And then what happens is, then if you have not just this, because honestly, the video that I told you I sent that guy earlier, you could clearly see when his release clicked, the arrow shaft just goes "Eer," like that, and it hasn't even left his face yet. It's just
mm,
it just goes boop, but that's about all it does, and then it straightens out. But when you have that kind of weight on the front and you create that bend up towards the front third of that arrow shaft, and it's coming out sideways. Well, now, Bill, what you're just trying to test for vein stability, it even becomes more critical. And not to mention, even the data is almost not totally relative because the projectile isn't even stable. Like what you're looking for an arrow that has literally stability as soon as that paradox, soon as that goes like that, and it's there, then this baby's rolling. And
Yeah.
that's going to give you awesome results. Rather, honestly, with the magnitude of your heads or a magnitude of other heads. So if someone is out of tune, center shot is out, or if knock position's out, the worst combination after that would be a front weight that's so heavy that it's creating this really weird dynamic thing that's happening back here, essentially right here in the arrow. And this thing right here is just kind of like catching the tail end of it. So, I love what you're doing. I just want to make sure people know that, like, Bill's trying to find things to where if it's off, you're still getting corrected. But if you're not choosing an arrow and if you're going crazy on the front of it to where the spine is a wet noodle, then what you and I are looking for kind of goes out the window because you're trying to correct two traumas, two different trauma zones within the same arrow.
Yeah, I've been testing 150 to 175 up front, and properly spined. And yeah, if you put a bunch of mass at the front, if you think about that launch becomes a much more kind of extreme event going on there because trying to push all that mass at the front from the back.
Yeah.
So you're going to get more flex. There's kind of more that can go wrong, I would say, at the launch there. Um, and and yeah, that excessive flexing for the guys that are doing it for more penetration, I can tell you flexing all the way to the target is not going to be good for
Yeah, that's not going to be good in its own.
yeah.
So show
And
me your arrow, Bill. Show me, is that what you're going to shoot?
yeah, it is. So this is a hybrid hunter vein. It's worked with AAE to get their max hunter profile and a few different material stiffnesses and for the experiment. And so the hybrid hunter kind of had the best overall performance when we factored in all of that accuracy, stability, wind drift, drag, spin up sound. And so this is a 3-degree helical, 3 fletch. I'm using a IP knock. I like a knock with a little shorter, throat to arrow distance.
Right.
I think that's a good knock there. So we're using these, and then that's our field point on the front right now. And then use a hit insert with an impact collar. So this is the titanium impact collar. It's 10 grains, and a 15 grain titanium hit insert, 125 head. So 150 up front, 300 spine, 28.5 inches long. So this is what I shot tack with all summer, out of 70-pound bow, 30-inch draw. And it's what I decided to go forward with in hunting this year for my caribou. I got a caribou hunt and then a couple of elk hunts following. And
Which head will you put on the front of that then, Bill?
so I'll put on, this is our solid blade S series. This is the S125. And I probably have a mixed quiver of S125s and single bevel 125s. It's the same blade, but just with a single bevel grind on the main blade and bleeder. And I've actually been going back and forth between those two, trying to decide if I like performance better of single bevel or double bevel. I make both now, so I don't care which one people like.
What's your personal opinion? I want to hear it. Give me pros and cons for both.
Yeah, so the pros for double bevel and why I was a double bevel guy for a long time was I think it has inherently kind of a stronger, sharper, more durable edge. Because you're grinding both sides. It's got a point that when you drive through something, there's kind of equal pressure on both sides, and it's very strong. It can be very strong, very sharp, very durable for that reason. Versus the single bevel, when all the pressure's on one side, it's more likely to want to break out that edge or curl it over or something like that. in my early testing and years back, that's what I saw, and I went to double bevel for that reason. The advantage of the single bevel is that with all that pressure on one side, it makes it rotate as it goes through an animal. So I can send you some photos, but I've shot a number of deer and elk where and I like bleeders on everything, even our single bevels. And when that single bevel with bleeders is rotating, it's kind of a 4-blade rotating, it actually leaves like a square hole, almost a perfectly square hole through the
Oh,
hide.
cool.
And so, yeah, that's the advantage there is it can open up the holes a little better on either side. A straight 2-blade, that hole can just close up too easily, I think, through the hide, get covered up. That's why I like bleeders anyways. And then if it's rotating, it seems to open up a little bit more. You get a little more, trauma through the animal as well. And what I found is with our steel, so we use an A2 tool steel. So it's, used to cut metal and metal stamping dies that can be made very hard and sharp to retain the edge, but also have great impact toughness. With our steel, and I increased the angle, and I talked to Dr. Ashby, he liked that 25-degree angle. But I found with heavy bone, I could bend that edge or chip that edge. But when I went to a 32-degree angle, then I could get through heavy bone without damage. And then I've seen enough. I'm still not saying it's better than single bevel or double bevel, but those are the differences. I think it gives you that rotation, which a lot of people like. That's become popular. To me, they both split bone really well. That's one thing that single bevel people will say is that torque pops bone apart. I agree that it does, but I also see that with the energy of my setup, I can shoot, our S series double bevel through, cattle femurs, things like that I get. I can pop that apart too with a double bevel with enough energy. And I think that's the difference with Ashby's study. He used the longbow, very low energy, very slow moving, and he with a very long 3-to-1 type broadhead with a double bevel, he could see it wedge in and stop to where a single bevel was helping him pop that apart. I think with the energy I have or modern compounds have, either one can pop bone apart. With if the blades don't bend, the ferrule doesn't bend, the arrow connection doesn't give on you. If you have a strong, durable blade that's not going to get damaged by the bone, it can pop it apart just fine as a double
Yeah.
bevel as well.
I just think there's certain animals where whether I'm shooting one of these suckers, which they're as well built as any I've ever seen, um, there's certain ones that there's certain animals you're just not getting through that thing, whether you have one of these or not. You might break it and you might get to that point, but to like get a lot past that it's hard because when animals are on their feet, I just feel like energy is absorbed differently, versus when we're always putting things flat, on something. I just I feel like from my experience, it's been different. So I like shot. These kind of go back earlier 2000s. I'm sure you've seen these. You've seen Silver Flames?
German kinetic, yeah, I shot those. Actually, that was one of the first heads when I had a broadhead fail on an elk, shoulder blade in 2004. And I started buying up broadheads, testing them. That's one of the first ones I found and was using. And it's one of the ones I kind of looked at as I modeled what I wanted to do. And that
Yeah.
has aluminum ferrule and a long pointed tip. And those are the two kind of failure modes. I could sometimes bend a ferrule, sometimes break the tip.
Yep.
When I got those, I was like, wow, this is actually a well machined product here, which
This was overkill for its time, I think. These were this was a typical overbuilt German product that honestly it was a pretty good design. It had some noise to it. I think trying to create some like cosmetics in the flame and get some of the weight out of there also created a
yeah,
little bit of that. But the thing is, like, back when a lot of these things were like being used, they were really being used by people that needed extra penetration, and they were really designing them for that. And usually those setups, in my opinion, weren't setups that were flying as fast as what stuff's flying now. So some of these things, like vented or not, when you start talking about the performance that we have right now, and listen, I'm talking performance with, a mid fours to a mid 500 grain arrow. I mean, these bows are spitting venom right now. I wonder, like, what was Ashby's bow? What was the bow that he used for those tests? Do you remember?
A lot of it was, well, I used a couple different weight longbows, but they were, I'm sure the arrows were going very slow. I don't remember off the top of my head what it was, but,
I
and,
don't I don't
longbow,
remember either.
a longbow as well, it's not cut to center. There's going to be major arrow flexing. So a lot of his conclusions were like, extreme FOC, things like that. I think they had more to do with how straight that arrow was when it went into target, because he's shooting at 15, 20 yards of animals that were killed and then just set up for him to shoot through. I think comparing what he did with a longbow to what we do with a compound, it really is
It's
different.
apples to oranges. That's what I don't like about the conversation. It's comparing a flintlock to a 338 Lapua and then trying to talk about what kind of bullet to put in a 338. It's like, these are very, very different things. I'm sure there's very important basic foundation principles, like a cut on impact head, and when I very first learned about this, the first person that actually talked to me about this was Joel Maxfield, and this would have been in mid to late 90s. I remember Joel just like taking a Zwicky, and he held it up like this. He had a Zwicky on the front of an arrow and he dropped it. This was back when we were all shooting, at the time we were shooting like T100, we were shooting Barry titanium 100s is what we were shooting. That was a really kind of cool fixed blade broadhead that kind of came out after the Thunderheads.
I was gonna say I was shooting thunderheads back in those days, I think. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, and a Thunderhead was one of the other ones. And Joel's just like, dude, he held it up this high and he dropped it down on a 2x4. And I mean, and that Zwicky just sticks in, the arrow's stuck up. Every other head we dropped was like bound, boing, boing. And he just said, if you're low poundage, man, you want to just be cutting right away. It'll just, and I was just like, okay, duh.
Mhm.
But then it became apparent, like, at that time, my arrow, I was probably shooting an ACC 360 maybe back then with, a standard 16 grain aluminum point and 100 grain head. So, maybe I had a 420 grain arrow. And at that point, had killed everything that I shot at with something like that and never even thought about it. But then when I, started talking about elk, Joel kind of showed me that and just said, "Hey, here's the difference. If you center an elk rib, you know, you got to be able to like start to pop through that thing." And so just that analogy alone was pretty simple. But the thing is, like, those bows that were shooting those Zwickis, we talk about some of these recurves. Well, they're half the kinetic energy that my wife's levitate at 40 pounds shoots, right? With an Axis 500. So it's like we're worried about penetration as a community for some reason right now, when the reality is shoot what's accurate, take advantage of the efficiency and the design of these new bows, find the middle ground on weight, and choose the head that suits your specs and the purpose. Like that, we have different arrows to choose from now. We have different broadheads to choose from now. People, like, those two decisions can like settle so much of this worry for people, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of the testing I was doing through broadhead development was measuring the force for different heads to push down through
Mm-hmm.
hide muscle or hide muscle and scapula. And that's where I saw it's a huge difference. The current Ironwill broadheads, it takes like 10 to 12 pounds to go down through hide and muscle. You can do that yourself. You can push that through that by hand. And next animal you get, take your broadhead and just push it into the hindquarter through the hide into the muscle. Is it taking 10 or 12 pounds? Well, a lot of the chisel point heads take like 50 to 80 pounds
Yeah, yeah,
penetrate. And then if you get an expandable, it can be up, 200 pounds or something like that.
yeah.
So you can really see the difference in energy. So yeah, I think that if you're shooting like an iron will head that takes minimal force to penetrate, man, just use an
Just
arrow that's
go.
reasonably sized. 450 to 500 is going to be great.
Yeah.
You're gonna zip through that elk. I shot through my biggest body bull a couple years ago. It was 82 yards. It was in front of the crease, so right in that triangle there, right through the meaty part of both shoulders. It only hit ribs. It didn't hit shoulder bones, but 82 yards, zipped through it. I found that arrow 20 yards past it. I mean, why do you need more penetration than that, really?
You
And my
don't.
bulls last year, I shot two bulls last year, and one was just quartering away, so I went through the shoulder blade on the exit, and that was even with our wide head, and it buried into a log 8 inches on the other side of the elk. And then on the other one, my Montana bull, it spun. It was on high alert, and it spun and turned into me on the shot. So I actually went through the shoulder bone on entry
Entrance. Yeah.
entrance, and that arrow still I found about 20 yards past the bull in the dirt. So yeah, you
What
don't
did it go through?
just
When you say shoulder, are you saying scapular or are you saying humerus?
no, it was the shoulder bone would be scapula, then T, and then it was kind of in the middle. But yeah, it wasn't the thinnest part of the scapula, but it was down,
It's
kind
more
of
at the bottom of the V where the high ridge comes in,
yeah, kind of near the T.
but
I think
not on the knuckle.
not on the knuckle.
Okay,
No,
okay, okay.
that one. Yeah. I did shoot a pig through the knuckle with our new wide single bevel back in April when I was testing them in Texas. And I can tell you that shot, it was 40 yards and his head is partially covered with leaves. And I must have aimed further forward than I thought. But when I made that shot, I heard the loudest sound I'd ever heard a crack on the hit. And I could see my lighted knock. And I thought, uh-oh, I must have hit something bad there. And actually hit the knuckle, which was on a board is
Yeah,
probably 2.5 inches of bone.
it's like a
Um,
hammer.
yeah, and it actually split it to where that I could take it apart and put it together like puzzle pieces. It split it in two. I did not get the broadhead poked through so I got an exit hole, but the arrow stayed in it. But I'm not recommending anybody shoot a knuckle. I think elk knuckle. There's some other animals where shot placement is really the most important thing
Yeah,
here. But I'm just saying, like, a deer and elk, if you hit that scapula, and that's really what I was trying to go for here with this whole design is because I had that, broadhead fail, and that was a 3 blade chisel point, fail to get through an elk scapula. And I just knew from my background in engineering, material science, and studying steels that for sure I could design a broadhead that could get through that scapula and get to the vitals and kill that elk and not wound it. So, that was kind of the whole reason why I got into this and just continue to try and make them better for people to be successful when they don't quite hit perfectly.
well, I can tell you on elk, moose, and honestly, either a big black bear and specifically a coastal bear or grizz, those knuckles, like I've seen them stop certain kinds of bullets. Like they are so freaking hard. So if you're making a choice based on an arm bone on those three animals, don't even factor it in because just like avoid that at all costs. Like avoid that at all costs.
Yeah,
Um,
and my point was just mentioning those bones or just the pass throughs is that I was shooting around a 500 grain arrow. So
yep.
there's not some 650 grain threshold that you need to get through a bone. I think you can see, adding mass can give you some benefit and retain momentum, but with modern compound bows, having it shoot really well, so you hit where you're aiming, and then if you want to get more penetration, I think you can do that with a broadhead more so than just adding mass.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And I think that's important for people. And I'll tell you what I love. I don't have a broadhead sponsor. I just honestly, I shoot. There is a lot over there. Like I've been kind of like, what all am I going to whack stuff with this year just to see? But your broadhead choice for sure can make so many of these decisions for you. Like go with an arrow that's accurate. I'm just, I've on the last few podcasts, I've told people a lot of when I go back and I look at a lot of my misses, the misses that I see are really from three things. They're either from deflections where I'm trying to get an arrow like with elk, sometimes when you're in dark timber, they come in and that stuff and you're like having to like be underneath the limbs of the pines and you're like, you're trying to pick these
Yeah.
little freaking lanes and half the time they come in they're looking at you, so then when they kind of lose interest and they turn, you've got that like window of time to be able to like thread a needle. But that's like those are the things you have to do to either fill a tag or not fill a tag. So for me, the flatness of the arrow, like the less I'm worried about my pins being so wide. When I draw back, there's a bunch of branches hanging over all my top pins, and I'm thinking, shit, how far is that branch? If that branch is 20 yards and it's hanging right there, well, you're gonna hit it. Your 20-yard pins on it because you're
Yeah.
you're holding on the elk down here. So I really think arc plays a huge factor in my success. Um, I think noise does. I definitely want to talk about veins. Like I'm very, very interested in some of your vein studies. Um, but the other thing too is, for me, my misses have come from misestimation with ranging. You get up and you're shaking and you lays past that bull to the pine tree. He just came around, so he's 2 yards past that. Or classic, I'll be in Alberta soon hunting canola. You're out there crawling through the canola. The only thing, you're trying, like normally I've got canola all like wrapped on my head, or I'm like holding it and I'm trying to just like get my eyeballs up so I can try to range literally like the base of a forked, what you can see. That's what I'm trying to range. I really am. I'm trying to range that. um, Sometimes that muley will stand up and stretch, and you're crouching down and you're trying to just get up and get that one confirmation before he beds back down. But like the mule deer I shot last year, when he stood up, he actually stood up several times. I got a range, and then when he laid back down, I kind of thought, I've got more time. So I snuck in closer, but once I got into which took about an hour and a half, but once I got to this new position at 30 yards, I realized I couldn't see him when he stood up that time. All I could see was like this much and he's standing up. So I ended up having to back out to a longer shot, and to where when he stood up, his vitals were exposed. But even though he stood up and I got a range the first time and he bedded back down, he must have just kind of repositioned a little bit and bedded down. And I was right at 2 yards off because when I went up, I saw the bed, which was his first bed, which is where I had been ranging him. But then I could see where he had actually walked through that canola. I thought he was just feeding in a little, honestly, I thought he was feeding within his bed. He actually came out of his bed, got about 2.5 yards or so closer to me and bedded down again, which is where the arrow was on the second bed. And I hit him a little high, but I got top of the lungs, liver, and if you watch that hunt from last year in Alberta, he went like 60 yards and piled up. If I was shooting 20 feet per second slower, Bill, I would not have got that deer. Like I'm just telling you,
What
I
speed
wouldn't
do
have.
you like? Sorry, what speed do you like to shoot for your hunting setup?
Well, what I had always told people was, as my career has gone on, I've continually increased the arrow weight of my arrow to where I was always in that mid 280s to upper 280s, right around 290 for speed, because
Okay.
I feel like you can get away with more broadhead options. Um, and honestly, for me, I feel like I've heard that sound so much. I've seen arrows at that speed so much. Now, in saying that, with the levitates, I'm actually shooting right at like 301 with a 530 grain arrow, I think, something like that. So, there also comes a point like for me, either I could back my poundage down, or
Mhm.
technically at this point, I feel like I could go up in arrow shaft weight to slow my bow down some, which honestly I wouldn't mind, staying in the mid 280s, 290 range. I like that range for steerability. And once you start going over, when you start hitting the 300 mark, like a whole nother set of problems could possibly start to show up. So what I've had to do is kind of put the brakes. So that's why, like, I had shot some 80-pound Hoyts previously. These levitates, the E2 cams are definitely the fastest that I've shot. So for that one, my problem is either I shoot 301 with the arrow that I'm at, or if I go to the heavier arrow or try to get any more weight in that arrow, I have to go to that next spine size. And once I do that, it's kind of diminishing return because my weight goes up so much that I fall below the 280 mark. So then I have to lighten that thing up. So I've just kind of made the decision of I like where I'm at for the middle ground and the tune of, with this cam and my I'm shooting a 30.5 inch draw. I can get away with a 300 spine with 150 total in the front, and I'm like good to go. I don't have to go to the 280 with this cam. Now on some of my Hoyts, I definitely had to. That those cams are a little bit more performance oriented, so they kind of ate up the spine of an arrow a little bit more than what I'm currently shooting. But I was
Mhm.
just at that position of, if I go to that 250 and then load it how I want, I've fallen beneath that speedometer that I want to be in. So that's kind of, that's kind of why I've ended up where I'm ended up. What poundage do you shoot? I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I've got bows at 70 pounds and 75 pounds. And at 70 pound, I can shoot the 300 spine. And really, when I first had the arrows, machine fletch, there were 300 spine is all I had available. I'd been shooting 260 spine axis. So I shoot 250, 260 spine when I'm shooting 75 pound, and I shoot a 300 spine, or I can shoot a 300 spine if I'm shooting 70 pounds, 28 and a half inch arrow.
What,
So
so what's your drawing? Are you 30 and a half? Did you say?
30,
Oh,
30 inch.
you are 30. Okay. Well, that's like a perfect number. Yeah. So, I mean, you're kind of at a weird place too, where it's like, have you measured the KE on both of those arrows? The 250 heavier with heavier weight versus the 300 going faster at the lower weight? Where like is there even that much of a difference to where it's like makes you decide which of the two you want to go with?
Well, I know, 75-pound bow, I'm gonna get more energy for that same draw length. It's just that force times distance
Yeah.
will equal that energy. So I mean, I know that I'll get more there. I know that I don't really need more,
Yeah.
because I'm zipping through things fine with a 70-pound bow. I just shoot the 75-pound pretty much as well as a 70. So that's why I lean towards it. But really, I set up to do the university testing was all with 300 spine, and I've done enough offhand shooting to verify the results that I just kind of stayed with it. So that's why
Yeah.
I'm currently, my bow's cranked down to 70, and I'm shooting the 300 spine here.
Which bow are you shooting? I can't remember.
Um, the V3X is what I'm shooting hunting with right now. I've got a few
Okay.
different bows. I've got Hoyt bows as well, like the RX. We use the RX5 for a lot of this, on the Hooter shooter. That's what I have set up on the Hooter shooter
Okay.
right
Okay.
now. I
So
mean, I agree with your speeds though. I really like. I'm the same way. If I'm over, I like 280 to 290. I think for a lot of people that even 270 to 290 is great. And if I'm over 290, I'm generally going to add a little bit of arrow weight to bring it down to that, 285 or so. Because I just think, yeah, with that higher speed, there's higher drag forces. It's just more difficult, to get everything to fly well.
see, I choose to shoot 75 pounds just because I figure that 5 pounds of pull weight is, for me, mentally, I feel like if I'm going to shoot a mechanical, having that extra weight is, to me, what then balances it off. Like if I was going to go fixed blade all the time, to be honest with you, if I was going to go fixed blade all the time, I don't think I would even shoot 75 pounds, especially now. Like, this shoulder's due to be rebuilt. I've been, I've been killing myself shooting for everybody. But I feel like because I like the mechanicals and I like big cuts and I like trauma for, whatever reason I just have. Um, I shoot that extra weight because I know I'm going to need a little bit more to push it through, but I also
Mhm.
feel like if I did decide to ever go straight fixed blades, I would just shoot the lower poundage. Honestly, I would shoot the lower poundage to keep my speed down there, or maybe I would go with a heavier arrow, maybe at that point, maybe I would go up to that 250 and try to slow it down to that, 275, 280 radar, because then I feel like I could shoot several of your heads and I would be just fine.
Yeah, definitely. And it, yeah, shooting a head is going to penetrate with a lot less force and zip through. You don't need to have as high bow poundage. I was hanging out with Derek Wolf in Montana a few weeks back, and he played for the Broncos. He's what is he, maybe 6'5", 6'6", 33-inch draw, 80-pound bows.
Yeah.
So I was trying to build some arrows for him,
He's
and
taller than me. He's a little bit taller than me. I kind of had to
yeah,
look
he's
up.
and you're a big guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he looks like just a giant Viking walking around. But
Yeah.
anyway, he shot an elk last year with a expandable. I won't mention which one it was, but with his setup, he's got double the energy of most hunters with compound bows. And he said at imp, and he only hit ribs. It was behind the shoulder near the crease, and he had most of the arrows sticking out of this side of the elk when it ran off, and he was worried. Oh man, I didn't make a good shot. Well, the elk died. I don't know if it got to the second lung or not, but it did kill it. It's just it just you just realize that, wow, he's got that much energy, but with the broadhead he chose, which had really pretty flat angle hit, but the broadhead you choose matters a lot on how much penetration you're going to get. And guy with that much energy, with some mechanicals, it isn't getting all that far. So it just kind of brings that out, how important it is, like thinking about your whole setup, bow poundage, but then also what's the head on the front.
I love how you over engineer. It's kind of like when I did the levitate, I just told them I'm gonna use the materials you guys have. We'll literally build the bow that I like, and then once we figure out how much it costs us to make, that's gonna be its price. And I'm like, I've always wanted to make the most expensive bow if I didn't have limitations to like what materials I could or couldn't use because of what the cost was. So, and that even went for like, at the time, like the DFC carbon, it was like that was more that was more labor intuitive than, the Mach series. So I feel like over engineering is awesome. I know that obviously over engineering also has to fit people's budgets. Um, so there's also a lot of other heads that are on the market that fit different price categories, but can still give someone the advantages of a fixed blade penetration. Bill, let me ask you, I would say the thing that I have the least assurance, I guess, based on just history, is going to be, well, I do have a lot of data in this aspect from friends that I have, but the thing is, like, they're also very high pounded shooters, so it's a little bit skewed. So I want to ask for the archers out there that are 26 and a half to 28 and a half inch draw length, what do you tell them to build for the weight arrow, and which head are you going to tell them to use?
26 to 28.
I mean, let's just say, do you want to break it into 26, 27, and 28? I mean, have you
Not
thought that
really.
much about the arrow weight
I
in those?
generally recommend 450 to 550 grains for everybody. And if they're a little bit lower poundage, light, shorter draw, it's more towards that 450.
Right.
But, and I'll say that, so increasing mass should give you, in theory, more penetration as you increase in mass. Now, it's not like a huge step change, but as you'll get a little more retained momentum, and then faster objects. So an animal should act like viscoelastic, and so as you're trying to go through it faster, it takes more force, and for that reason, you should get a little more penetration if you have more mass going through there at a little bit lower speed. But and when I run the numbers for myself, it's like a 10% increase in penetration is what I estimate I would get with adding 100 grains, say going from 450 to 550, maybe even less than that. So it's not a huge factor, but I'll tell people, if they're worried about penetration, well, you can increase your mass, but just within a trajectory you're happy with. Go and shoot a little heavier arrow, see what your trajectory looks like. I went too heavy at one time, and my arrows were bombing at 50. And I'm like, that's not going to work for out west big game hunting, not at all.
Yeah.
So, and I was just trying to help somebody that was really low poundage, shorter draw. We were trying to maybe get them to 400. So I'm like, let's try this weight, see what the trajectory looks like, see what you think. But yeah, I'm generally recommending 450 to 550. And if they're a little and I'll position that depending on if they're lower poundage or higher poundage, but that's kind of a general range that I'm often recommending. And for which head, we make our buff series without bleeders that are kind of I really just see those as kind of like Cape Buffalo. We have guys shooting Cape Buffalo elephants, giraffes, that both have like, I think 3-4 inch thick hide, hippos, things like that, where penetration is everything. You just want to maximize it out. And then it's the 2-blade solid head. And we have some guys that are doing it with double bevel, some with single bevel. I don't know that can really say there's a difference there, but if you just want max penetration, you take the bleeders out. You could apply that to women or children too. I found that adding that bleeder doesn't change the force to penetrate much. So I generally just recommend them on everything in North America, whether it's deer, moose, elk, whatever. But I'm generally just recommending like our standard S series if they're a child lower poundage shooter. Our wide head, surprisingly, doesn't have that much more force to penetrate. Like once you get that cut going to make it a little bigger, don't actually measure much of a difference. But I just know that, maybe there's just a heavier bone that's just on that edge of where you might miss it with a more compact. But yeah, our wide ones penetrate well as well. And it's more, I shoot our wides on whitetails, bears,
30 or
and elk
less.
setups if the shots are going to be 15 under, more or less.
Did you say
I
50
might reach
and
out
under?
further than that. That's where I like the compact one. It's just a little more forgiving in flight at long range.
Did you say 50 and under?
Yeah,
150
that's kind of
and
where I
under?
draw the line on our wide heads versus our standard for me personally.
Yeah, it seems like if you get this angle right, the amount of pressure it takes, for that little bit, it's really this.
Yeah.
And there's some expandables on the market to where when they want the extra cut, it's not because they're adding length to the blade, it's because they're flattening blades. And like that doesn't look very awesome to me.
Yeah, our
I've tried
mainstay.
them. But a lot of these things I'm like, okay, everything experience wise tells me this is what's going to happen. And a lot of times I try those, and unfortunately some people watch a film and they'll be like, oh, here we go, rage or whatever. And I'm like, well, it actually, I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. Or actually this was a prototype 3-blade I was trying, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, all our main blade angles are like 22 to 25 degrees per side. So it's a pretty shallow cutting in. And if you think about if you take a knife and cut meat or hide or whatever, and you're doing you want to do it kind of a shallow angle, right? And then it cuts pretty well. If you just like chop it flat, like just swing your knife flat and try and chop it, it's going to take a lot, or you press it through, it's going to take way more force. And
Yeah.
I think some of those that are going up 45 degrees or beyond, it's getting more of a, they're trying to chop rather than slice
Yeah,
at
and
that
it's
point.
driving. It's driving rather than cutting upon entry. Um, well, so I personally, and I told you this, the one of the things that I love about the head is how that thing's going to penetrate. I love it. I love that. And it's overbuilt. I love that too. Um,
Can I
but
comment on the over engineering here for a minute? So
yeah,
I like I said, I've developed products for 25 years for other companies, and I always would design the best. I don't, my focus is performance. I love bow hunting, I love mechanical engineering and improving performance, and so I would always come with like, these are the things we can do to make this product way better, going forward. And I'd be the design engineering rep, but we'd have like the sales guys there, the financial guys. There'd always be a battle. They're like, well, how much can we raise the price of the product? Well, I don't know. And then the sales guys would say, no, we won't be able to raise the price. Well, then we're not gonna add cost if we can't get more money.
yeah,
So I would sometimes lose those battles. And I've always thought, if I ever had my own company, all the decisions are going to be based on what's the best product performance. And especially because I'm really making these things for myself because I want to be a better bow hunter.
yeah,
Um, but all the decisions are based on what's the best possible performance, or what I think it is, or through my testing, and
yeah.
and that's what you're going to get. And then the costs kind of fall where they are. And yeah, our costs to make a head are, I've done some comparisons before, and it's like 20 times the cost to make our head versus a lot of these out there.
Oh
It's
yeah.
ridiculous. And if there wasn't a development engineer also as the CEO, there'd be differences in our products. There'd be some cost reduction. But no, I just want to offer the best product possible. I know the price point's high, and it's not going to be worth it for everybody, or some people just aren't going to have the money to do it. I totally understand.
I
Um,
couldn't, dude. I can't afford your heads for the amount of shit that I shoot with broadheads, bro. Yeah, I'm like, those things are gonna be very guarded in my quiver. Like they're gonna come out if totally needed.
well, they're very reusable. I think 9 now is the record of number of deer one guy shot with the same head. I think we've heard. But yeah, you can use them over and over. But
I shot six things with one of these. Like
nice.
I shot six things in Africa with one of those. Where I'm like, I was in a hide, so I was shooting up. The arrow was always kind of just laying out there somewhere. Um, but yeah, so my the reason I shoot expandables a lot is I just have found smaller holes at times clog up. And even though you've got a hole on both sides, for me, a bigger hole because I can do it. I've just had really good luck. If I don't hit a solid bone like an arm or a spine, um, especially if I'm back, which for me anyway, if I'm ever anywhere, I'm playing it safe. Like, and even though I know I shouldn't do this, listen, there's times where I'm pulled back on something and I'm debating how tight I want to get to the shoulder. And then there's also a voice in my head that's just like, middle of the body, this thing's dead. dude. I mean, if you hit one anywhere behind that shoulder, for me, and especially if I'm behind the diaphragm, it just seems like the bigger the cut, the better you are. At least, that's been my mentality. So, I want to say it how it is, but I want your opinion on
Yep.
that too.
Yeah, I mean that's a valid point of view. If you're hitting back, liver, guts, a bigger hole can help you out. They can get it to lay down sooner. Get more, just get more trauma to get the animal to die quicker, hopefully not go as far, get more blood or, material on the ground to see. So that's a valid point for sure. And really with a smaller head, that, it's kind of, are you going to hit forward or back? And
Yeah.
that's where an iron will is going to help you out, is if you hit forward. What I found is that the more forward I shoot, in the heart lung area, the quicker they die. If I hit
Yeah.
like top of heart lung up in that golden triangle, man, that animal's dead in about 4 or 5 seconds.
Yeah.
It's quick, it's dying in sight. That's, to me, that's ideal. That's what I
Yeah.
want to do. But if you're playing with that close, then that's when you can more likely hit scapula, something like that. And I think with an iron will, if you hit the scapula, it's for sure going through it. For most people set up, most North
Yeah.
American animals. If you hit back, well, the animal's dead. It's going to die. If you hit liver or guts, it's going to take a while. Hopefully, it's a bad situation, right? But
Yeah.
hopefully it's zipping through with minimal force. A lot of the animals I shoot just go, 20, 40 yards and look around like, what was that what zipped through me just now? This force
Yeah.
is so low to go through. It's very quick. So less shock to them. Hopefully they don't go that far. And you can find them. But yeah, I would agree that a smaller hole, and it's part of the reason I shoot our whiteheads for whitetails, because
Yeah.
man, even though shots are closer and it's maybe iron wills are maybe overkill, you could argue, but they're more likely to move.
Yeah.
At whitetails, what I'm more likely to hit in the scapula or spine. I've had deer, like I've had does at 40 yards spin and be looking the other direction.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for for sure.
Especially when I'm hunting them down in Texas or Alabama. But anyway, that's why I shoot the wide there, because if they're moving often, and I'm more likely to get one lung liver or liver guts. And when I've had those shots with a wide, then a lot of times they've gone, 80, 100 yards, and they're dead. Not a long time, but no, I totally understand the argument that a bigger hole can help, especially if you're back, hitting back a little bit.
Well, like for me, when I've experienced poor shots, I guess the mechanicals have definitely come through, like for sure. Now, the other thing is you said something that kind of made me rethink my mental process when I'm shooting, because I honestly, there was like a time frame where I loved shuttle T-locks. Like there was,
Mhm. Yeah.
there was a window of time where I loved the shuttle tees. And honestly, if you look back at some of the earlier knock on videos, I shot shuttle tees, and I would actually intentionally, I called it shoulder folders. I would literally try to pin. I didn't want to pass through. I wanted to pin both arms together. I would literally like go straight up, and I could stuff one where it would be about even out both sides and just pin their arms together. And they'd normally break the arrow running, but when you're forward like that, like, and that's one thing you learn by hunting Africa, is you learn how far forward the heart and lungs actually are. You have to be in the golden triangle for whatever reason on African animals,
Right.
because if you get behind the shoulder, they're just different. They're like more forward packed for some reason. So I think when I shot that head, I honestly wasn't worried about it, and I kind of just went straight up the arm, and I could see that triangle, and I would just try to be right on the inside of that triangle. But if I kind of was going low to the elbow on a whitetail, that I could get through. Um, but I would just try to stuff the shoulders together. Now, with the mechanical, you said something that made me kind of think mentally. I honestly feel like there's a voice in my head that just says you're better off a little bit back.
Mhm.
And it produces, like, it does, like on an elk, the lungs actually do go quite a ways back, and they do on a moose too. They're further. It's almost like the kill zone on a Mackenzie target on an elk is about actual. Those things do kind of go up and back more than what people think. But I feel like maybe where my mentality goes when I know that's the head I have on, I'm not trying to go straight up the arm anymore. I'm telling myself behind the shoulder, behind the shoulder, behind the shoulder. And if they have any angle, honestly, I want to ram it in the opposite side of the shoulder. I'm not trying for an angle that's going to pass it through. I want to peg the opposite leg. My experience has been when you hit something like I've definitely zipped in and out of stuff with like, with really sharp heads, zip in and out. They kind of walk off like what happened. And if you hit them in the gut, they're kind of hunched up, but they'll just like go. They don't really know what happened.
Yeah.
And there's like something hanging out of them and that cuts big. Honestly, they like, and let's say it is straight gut, the amount of times where I've actually been able to physically see them just get to the point where they're like, something's wrong. I can see that. I can feel this. And it just seems like, it's almost like it forces them to bed down sooner. So those are just experiences that I've had as a hunter. And I think they're experiences that a lot of people who don't have high numbers of kills can appreciate that, but I feel like that is a real thing. Like when you said it goes in and out of them, they don't know. I've certainly seen whitetails during the rut where I've shot a real sharp fixed blade like that, zipped in, zipped out. They just keep rutting and rutting and rutting till all of a sudden they're just like blood pressure's too low and they just tip over. They have no idea what happened. But I think when you really crack something that does like a lot of damage, and especially if it's protruding, they just like only go a certain distance before they have to kind of say like, is this bad? Like I feel like it's like Will Ferrell when he's got the dart in his neck. You know, is he just like, is it bad? Is it bad? Is it bad? Like, and you're like, yeah, it's bad. It's bad. So that's my mentality with it.
Yeah, and every situation's varying. A lot of stuff's anecdotal. But Cody Greenwood Trad Lab has tried to study that. I think at one time he said if the arrow is in the animal, they go further. They realize, oh, somebody's shooting at me or whatever, and they're going further than if it zips through. I think he also had something that showed this is in his latest kills data. I believe it showed when they're hit with mechanicals, they go further than with like a fixed blade head too. I wasn't sure if it's just cut on contact, but there's
Okay.
more of a smack when they hit. But
Yeah.
it's going to depend on where they're hit too, I think. And
Yeah.
I do think that on gut shots, doing more trauma helps. I shot one big pig. It moved at the shot, and I hit it back, and it's straight
And
guts. And unfortunately, and I saw it go 100 yards and just stop right there. Like it knew something was it was hurting. So that's the thing. Why you want to do more trauma? They'll go shorter distance and die quicker, or you can see them bed down, get a follow up shot, take them out sooner.
yeah. So let's talk veins quick, Bill. What time do
Yeah.
we've got a little bit here. I'm very curious on your veins. So kind of walk me through that process, and kind
Yeah.
of where you ended up, where you're at. I've actually some of the arrows that are over here, were Max Hunters. I actually shot Max Hunters on some of the very first, Sonic prototypes. Um, so
Yeah.
I'm
So,
curious kind of how you got to that and honestly how some of these other ones that I prefer, not necessarily more, just I guess I'm trying to cover such a broad spectrum of people's setups and the types of broadheads and everything people are tuning, whereas I think with you you're trying to find like you found a match for like the tip on the tip of the spear, so to speak. So
yep. Yeah. I'm trying to find out really what works the best with Ironwill broadheads, but I think it applies to fixed blades head in general that have blades about this size. And so what I found is with this profile does better than a parabolic type profile for the restoring torque. So, if your bow's out of tune, your arrow's coming off a little bit, you got a fixed blade head on it, how much restoring force is there? And it's a significant difference there. It was about 25% or so. Now, this is in a model, right? This is in a fluid dynamic model. So rather than having so a parabolic would be like the Max Stealth. If I look at a parabolic that has the same, surface area, there's just more of the vein that's forward. And I should say that when I just match a parabolic to the same, this is like 0.58 high, and the parabolic is a 0.5 high.
Yeah.
So that's what the Max Stealth is too. So what I see, and that's the reason where I know the Max Stealth is really popular. It's pretty quiet head. I know it's one you like, and a number of other guys do, and I've done a fair amount of testing with it. And I keep putting it in my testing, for that reason. But so that's kind of the reason for this over the Max Stealth or longer parabolic, is that this this surface area back here and this extra height adds a lot more restoring torque according to the model. But the drag is pretty similar. And so I should say that's the restoring torque in a 3 Fletch version of each, 3 Fletch Max Hunter versus 3 Fletch, say Max Stealth, or Hybrid Hunter and Hybrid 2.6. So that's really the reason I like this profile better. When you go to the reason I go with the 3 Fletch versus 4, I'm actually going to do more studying on this because, according to the model, adding a 4th Fletch should give you a significant amount more restoring torque, for stability and accuracy. But I know that the testing I've done with the out of tune bow, when I tried to do like a 4 Fletch 0.4-inch high vein, had very poor results. This was a bow that was out of tune about 8 inches bare shaft versus fletch shaft at 40 yards. I could hit with say a Hybrid Hunter or Max Hunter. I could get them to hit. I could get broadheads and field points to hit within an inch of each other at 40 with that much out of tune with that vein. But if I went to a 4 Fletch parabolic type, it was only 0.4 inches high. I was 7 or 8 inches off field points to broadheads. So the vein height seems to matter a lot with stability with fixed blade heads. And so I do think though, with your setup, which is a 4 Fletch Max Stealth, it does a good job of stabilizing and making fixed blade heads shoot accurately. What I saw though is that I was adding that 4th vein, there's a bit more drag from that 4th one, a bit more weight. So is it needed? Does that outweigh the negative? So anyway, I'm a bit on the fence yet on that, but I plan to do studying of 3 vein versus 4 vein in this next year's study.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of it, and like I said, for me, I have to look at like not just one product. I'm trying lots of products. So it's, whether I grab a head like this or whether I grab, a head like your first one or your second one or, whatever it is, like I want that stability. And another thing I like too, one of the dangerous things right now on a lot of these bows is clearance. And some of the vanes that are on the market that are pretty dang high, the Max Hunter is kind of right there on the border. You can't really go much taller than that because like on some of the newer Matthews, and the Hoyts, your inside cable clearance is pretty minimal. You definitely have to pay attention to knock position, and like where that's going through. If you have 3 now with 4, I tell people to shoot it like an X. You get the most clearance, from your scope, from the lowest point of your scope. You also get, the lowest clearance here. A lot of the rests have a holder that's here in the middle. So, you start going to a 3 Fletch and, you're either worried about inside vein to cable, you're worried about bottom vein to the little holder part, depending on the type of enclosure, even just going, with a cock vein straight up, some of these I've seen contact there too. So for me, I think I've offered people more clearance options and then more options for the types of broadheads they shoot. And then to be honest with you, like today, I think I posted like 6 different slow motion videos. It's a bow that I built. I built this bow 2 days ago. I've never bare shaft tuned it. I literally shot it through paper. There's one hole back there. I set it up, shot one hole through that paper, and then went out and got those marks. And, today I went out and shot 3 different arrow shafts uh at 60 yards, and they're all touching. So for me, just when I look at like what happens for groups, and I'm not 3D modeling, but I'm also looking at, like when we talked in the beginning, if I make a marginal shot, whether I can scientifically explain it or not, which of these actually bail me out. And just when I look at how that thing stabilizes with 4 when it comes out, and then when it decides to start going, I've just had really, really good tuning with mine. But I've shot some your way before. I just feel like when I got outside of the type of configurations that you're doing, things start to get a little bit more finicky, and spine match starts to definitely get a little bit more finicky too. What did you find with some of the other brands? You don't have to say brands, but are there any that were there some that has a lot of hype to them but just did not do what they said?
Yeah, there were.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't want to give you those details.
I feel like I know, but
I don't mean to
yeah.
make any enemies there, but you're let me first say that your point about vein clearance is pretty legit. That you got to make sure if you're going to go to a taller vein, you got to really make
You
sure you
have
don't
to
have a vein
know.
clearance issue. And I had in rest drop away rest can rebound. And I didn't realize to what amount they rebounded until we start doing all this high speed video work.
Oh
Holy
yeah.
man, that I was having an issue, and some of the stiffer veins in the testing. This is how I figured it out. Some of the stiffer veins at long range, I'd be shooting great with the hybrid hunter, which is it's relatively flexible. And then go to a
Yeah.
really stiff vein, and also I have a flyer, and I realized what was happening is I was getting an inconsistent rebound of the rest, and it was once in a while clipping a flange. Depending on what flange material you have, it may or may not even show up for you, but it's definitely something to look for and be careful about.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
I,
there's
I I posted a video about, the amount of people that come up at tack and they're like, "Will I clear?" And they kind of put their arrow in backwards, and then they just say, "Oh, just turn your knock, put your knock straight down, and then you'll clear your scope there." It's like, no, if if you have like a lot of these veins that are out there, and you go cock vein down on a QAD, or even ham ski where they have the little arrow holder, one small move and you can see it, and I'll look in their quiver and I'll be like, okay, see every arrow that has that mark, that's
yeah,
every arrow where your knock is indexed incorrectly for clearance. And here's the thing, if you torque your bow, even though you see clearance looking down the back of it, if you have any kind of torque, you can actually bring that system, that arrow into that system. So part of the logic for me is I'm also trying to weigh the teeter totter of steering, plethora of different options, and what is going to let someone that doesn't know clearance put my arrow on and not all of a sudden have this, I'm getting a 6-inch left tear. What's going on? Well, you're shooting your
yeah,
veins up and down, and it's a high profile, and you're hitting on the inside of your cable. You know what I mean? It's like, so I try to minimize that possible human error too.
yeah, definitely. And then your other question there, yeah, there were veins that some of the performance claims, like, where's the data, guys? Because because I'm not seeing it. I'm surprised. This just goes across the hunting industry in general, boeing industry. Claims are made when a new product is announced, and they just let the marketing guys make stuff up. I mean, where's the engineering data to support this stuff? It's ridiculous.
It
Um,
isn't.
Vein
Yeah.
that claims it's quieter is a screamer of a vein. Things like that. It's
Did you do anything where you actually altered the shape of the vein to see if you could get the noise to go away?
we're we're doing we did a little bit of prototyping of the different features and to try and understand that better. And we're going to do a lot more of that this next year. Play around with the different features and see if what was causing this noise. One thing we did that I'll tell you about that was pretty interesting is with this hybrid hunter profile. We did it in different stiffnesses. And when we went really flexible, um, they just buzzed
Yeah, yeah,
the whole
yeah,
way,
yeah.
just loud
Yeah,
buzz.
they actually wrinkle
Yeah,
and
and then
they'll
the high
kind of
speed.
curl over too. They'll kind of curve. You seen them do that?
Yeah, and we've got some high speed video. I'll put this out sometime, but those veins are, yeah, they're bending all over, but they're just vibrating like crazy. You can see it the whole way going down there. So,
Essentially it's like a diaphragm call is what they turn into. And so
yep.
there's some veins on the market that have a pretty high, short, high profile vein. They have a high ridge and they make a pretty distinct sound. I'm sure you know what one I'm talking about. But if you think about it, like what I found was this back part where that steep point comes down, this back part, if you look at it from the back, it's literally like a diaphragm call, like buzzing, where the point comes down to the radius. This radius is like buzzing, and where that air is going over the top of that steep point, it really makes a sound. And I actually tried so like I got hired by Norway to design that the fusion vein. So I was kind of we did that was kind of a long process. And the reason the rear of that fusion vein is shaped the way it is because on the vein that I'm talking about, which I think you know, I took like fingernail clippers and I would nip that off and the sound would go away, but just the performance, I'm talking like a mil and a half pinching off
Hmm.
with a pair of nails clippers and just the performance, because they are good about correcting, like you said, if there's torque coming out of the bow, because it's this big rudder, the rudder is going to grab and go, which I think is, if you're measuring torque out of the bow, then short, something taller is going to help you. It's just a matter of are you going to actually have clearance, if that's happening too.
Hmm.
But it's crazy what like a millimeter of a profile will actually do for what it does downrange or what it does for
Yeah,
sound.
yeah, it's surprising how small the features can be. And one thing that I think there's a belief in the industry that stiffer is quieter. Just got need a really stiff vein. Well, what was interesting is that we actually saw kind of a medium stiffness was a little bit quieter than a max stiffness. And I think and it probably depends on like this is a 3-degree helical, that helical angle adds some stiffness too, versus like a straight fletch. If you think about like, sheet metal that might be straight will flex easier, but if it's bent in a cylinder, it'll support some weight, right?
Yeah.
So the geometry adds some stiffness as well. But what I think is once you get beyond the point where you're not fluttering, just being stiff enough may actually be better than being too stiff because if it gives a little bit, maybe it reduces the pressure and the pressure waves coming off of it. I'm not quite sure. We're trying to understand why, but we actually saw that we could, if we went too high in stiffness, it actually started getting a little bit louder yet as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, 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 they do. And the other thing too is like, the reason people shot feathers were because how forgiving they were when they're passing through, going across the shelf on the old bows or honestly, like for target bows, we shot feathers a lot of times on our indoor setups because, you're shooting a launcher blade too. And, sometimes depending on your torque, that feather just seemed to really, if you had a little variation as it was coming across that lizard tongue, the feathers were definitely more forgiving. They just don't
Mhm.
travel well. They're not fun to hunt with if you got to keep them dry. But when a vein becomes too stiff, like there's diminishing return on that too. It
Right.
certainly works if it doesn't contact anything, but and it's certainly if it's real stiff, obviously going through an animal, there's two different arguments on that. Do you want to clean the hole out, or do you want that thing to be able to wrap up tight and be able to push all the way through to help the penetration? So there's kind of there's two different opinions on that too, but honestly, I think, in the end, it needs to, like, people need to just see what groups, pick the head based on your weight and your draw length, and honestly, the type of arrow that you're choosing. I love it when you said, shoot some different weight arrows and see what you like for like your sight pins. Like, I think once you go to a tighter sight pin, you bring that sight in, those pin gaps start to tighten up, and you start to realize, you know, 1 yard isn't life or death. But certainly on some of these setups, some of those setups I tested, where I went out and shot, like, I'm trying to shoot live. I'm trying to not cut anything. I'm showing people, like, here's real, this is how I shoot. This is how this bow performs. People need to factor in all those things and actually just try them. And you'll find out that, listen, we're, we're splitting hairs on something that with our compound bows, we're so far ahead of some of this stuff that people are worried about right now. And honestly, some of the people that are worried about it, they're getting scared about it. They're not even going out and shooting, a dozen animals to where they've actually got the experience to say, you know what? I just didn't like when this happened. I think some of it's like more of like a scare tactic, and it's not totally necessary.
Yeah, I would agree for
Well,
sure.
Bill, I've got to get rocking. You've got to get rocking. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it too.
Yeah, thanks, John. We'll have to keep in touch here as I do the study next year. I might call and pick your brain on a few things.
I want to be able to loop you in on mine at some point.
I'm looking forward to that too.
All right. Thanks so much, Bill. I appreciate it. And good luck on your caribou hunt,
Yeah.
man.
Thanks, John. Take
All
care.
right. Yep. Be sure to check out knockonarchery.com for our full line of custom designed products, as well as free in-depth education and bow hunting entertainment to help you shoot at your best.